Elias Rowan bought the boat for $1, and a promise to move it before the harbor board lost patience. It sat behind the old chandlery under a tarp the color of wet ash, 32 feet of tired cedar planks, peeling white paint, and brass fittings gone green at the edges. Every practical person in Brindle Harbor called it a project with no profit in it. His dog Finn stepped onto the deck, walked straight to the bow locker, and refused to leave. Elias had been a Navy navigator, the kind of man who trusted charts, weather notes, and quiet math more than big speeches. He did not buy the boat because he needed a boat. He bought it because his hands had been idle too long, and idle hands made his thoughts wander into rooms he did not care to visit. A wooden boat offered clear work, sand this, seal that, measure twice, try again tomorrow. Finn loved clear work too. He was a black and tan dog with one folded ear and a gift for finding the one person in a room who needed a little space. He knew the sound of Elias's breathing on restless mornings. He knew which pocket held biscuits. He also knew, somehow, that the weathered boat was not just a hull waiting for paint. From the first visit, Finn treated the bow locker like the most important place in Brindle Harbor. The boat's name was still visible beneath the flaking stern paint, Clara May. Nobody at the chandlery knew which Clara or which May. The owner of the yard, Ansel Bright, said it had been a watch boat once, then a teaching boat, then a storage problem. Ansel had a way of saying storage problem as if it covered all regrets. He gave Elias a coffee can full of keys, none labeled, and a folder with registration papers soft from damp air. The folder contained bills for varnish, a faded survey, and a photograph of the boat tied alongside the fuel dock, with people standing around her. Rail. The photograph had been cut at one corner, as if someone had removed a face or a sign, but the deck still showed colored storm shapes hanging from clips. Elias did not know what they meant. Finn nosed the photo, then turned toward the bow locker again. Ansel offered advice while pretending not to care. Replace the boat with fiberglass, strip the cabin, sell the brass to someone who liked nautical decorations. Elias thanked him and ignored most of it. He had learned that old equipment should be understood before being modernized. A person who tears out a strange bracket too early may later discover it held the whole answer. Elias spent the first week making the Clara May safe to stand on. He pumped rainwater from the bilge, braced a loose rail, and cleared gull feathers from the cabin roof. Finn stayed on deck, following the scrape of the broom and the squeak of each screw. But whenever Elias opened the bow locker, Finn's whole body changed. His head lowered, his tail slowed. He breathed at the seam of the hatch like an old scent had risen through the wood. The locker should have held rope. It did at first glance. 3 coils lay inside, stiff with salt and age. Beneath them were cork floats, a cracked lantern, and a canvas bag full of wooden clothespins. Elias nearly tossed the bag into the discard pile until Finn nudged it back with his nose. Elias opened it and found the first clue, a set of painted cards tied with sail twine. Each card showed a simple shape and a color: blue triangle, fair morning; yellow square, fog line close; green circle, steady tide; white stripe, hold for local report. The paint had chipped, but the handwriting on the backs was precise. Do not post from radio alone. Confirm at outer bell. Ask Sal on east ledge. Check gull line above cannery roof. Elias sat on an overturned crate while Finn watched the cards with focused attention, and then Elias caught himself. Not dramatic. Careful. There was a difference. He put the cards on the cabin table and kept digging. Behind the clothespin bag, a false panel shifted under his fingers. Elias knew the feel of a space built by someone who wanted tools handy but dry. He slid the panel out and found a narrow compartment holding notebooks wrapped in oilcloth. The top notebook was labeled Harbor Weather Watch. Spring soundings. The pages were full of small observations. Wind at North Bluff before dawn. Pressure falling but inlet calm. Kelp leaning east after noon. Bell buoy delayed in swell. 3 boats held back, 2 went south, market delivery moved to Wednesday. It was not official meteorology. It was local knowledge written by a person who knew exactly which gust mattered to which dock. A folded chart inside the back cover showed the harbor divided into hand-drawn zones. The inlet was marked with 2 arrows that changed direction by season. The cannery roof had a star beside it. The marsh grass had 3 pencil notes. There were circles around the fuel dock, the ferry float, the market pier, and a low rock Elias had walked past for years without understanding why anyone would care. Finn cared about the rope stored with the chart. It was a short length of line with knots at uneven intervals and colored thread wrapped between them. Elias stretched it along the cabin bench. The knots matched distances between the mast marks. The colored thread matched the painted cards. The Clara May had used simple tools. But the simplicity hid careful calibration. A rope, a card, a note, a sightline, a morning habit. Together, they became a local instrument. Elias forgot the cold in his knees. He had come to the yard expecting rot and hardware. Instead, the Clara May had handed him a harbor's memory of weather. Finn placed one paw on the bow locker rim and leaned forward until Elias laughed. "All right," he said. "I see it. You found the paperwork department." Brindle Harbor did not look like a place that needed a watchboat. The town had phone apps, Coast Guard broadcasts, marina bulletin boards, and a lighthouse museum with a gift shelf full of striped mugs. Yet small operators still argued over conditions in the parking lot. Clam diggers checked one dock, charter captains checked another, and the island delivery crew waited for somebody older to say whether the inlet would behave after lunch. When Elias asked about the harbor weather watch, people gave him pieces instead of answers. Ansel said that Clara May used to tie up at the fuel dock on certain mornings. Nora from the fish market remembered colored boards hanging from the rail. A retired ferry scheduler named Bev said her father never left on a supply run until the boat's white stripe came down. Nobody could explain why the whole practice had stopped. The second clue came when Elias sanded the mast base. Under layers of chalky paint, he found shallow grooves cut into the wood. They were not damage. They were measurement marks, spaced in a pattern. Finn sat beside the mast and kept glancing toward the harbor mouth. Elias followed the sight line. From that spot on deck, the marks aligned with the outer bell, the cannery roof, and a dark seam of water where the channel turned. He sketched the angles in his notebook. A boat moored in the right place could read wind, current, tide color, and local cloud breaks at once. The Clara May had not been parked at the fuel dock for charm. It had been positioned like an instrument. Its deck gave a patient observer a clean view of the details that broad forecasts missed. That discovery changed the repair list. Elias stopped thinking like a man fixing a private boat and started thinking like the unknown person who had built a floating station. He cleaned the brass barometer mount instead of replacing it with a shelf. He saved the rail clips that had held painted cards. He photographed the mast marks before sealing them. Each small choice made the Clara May less of a possession and more of a question. He began asking questions with better objects in his hands. When he showed the rope to Ansel, the yard owner stopped sanding a skiff and admitted the old watch crew used to call it the morning ruler. When Elias showed the brass tags to Nora, she found her grandfather's initials and remembered him changing delivery times after checking the board. When he showed the chart to Simon, the dock carpenter pointed at the marsh note and said, "That is why my uncle never trusted a calm inlet before a warm noon." The boat was giving Elias a practical education. Each clue proved that the Clara May had not guessed at weather. It collected small, repeatable signs from people whose work made them attentive. The cards were the public face of the system. The notebooks were the memory. The rope and mast marks were the method. The bow locker, Finn's chosen spot, was the place where all of it had been protected from damp and forgetfulness. Finn kept answering that question with his nose. He found a second compartment beneath the forward bench, packed with dry chalk, folded tide sheets, and a tin of brass tags shaped like little houses. Each tag carried initials on one side and a dock number on the other. BD Dock 4, NV Market Pier, SR Island Run. They were not souvenirs. They were people and routes. Elias laid the tags on the cabin's sole. The pattern matched the notebooks. When wind shifted early, the island run waited. When fog touched the east ledge, market boats used the inner path. When the gulls fed above the cannery roof before noon, the afternoon breeze arrived sooner than the radio suggested. It was practical, humble, and built from years of observation. The town's current problem came into focus slowly. Nobody lacked information. They lacked a trusted place where information came together. Every dock had a version of the morning. Every phone app had a forecast. Every experienced adult had a feeling in the shoulders, a memory of a day that looked similar, a private rule about cloud height or watercolor. Without the Clara May, those signals stayed scattered. That scattering cost people in quiet ways. Nora packed too early and unpacked too late. Simon scheduled repairs during windows that closed faster than expected. The island delivery crew waited for 3 opinions and still felt unsure. Charter captains checked different sources and reached different conclusions. None of these were disasters. They were frictions, wasted fuel, spoiled timing, lost confidence, and arguments that could have been avoided if the harbor had one calm table for shared notes. Elias recognized the shape of the problem from logistics rooms, though he never described it that way in town. A tool does not have to be complicated to matter. It only has to put the right information in the right place at the right time, in a form people trust enough to use. The Clara May had once done that with paint, pencil, and coffee. Elias found the person who could confirm it at the end of a pier painted blue. Bev, the retired ferry scheduler, lived above a bait shop with geraniums in the window and a kitchen table covered in Tide calendars. She welcomed Finn before she welcomed Elias. "Dogs know who keeps biscuits," she said, and opened a drawer with the confidence of a woman who had been found out many times. When Elias showed her the cards, Bev became very still. "My father made these," she said. "Not the first set, the third, maybe. The first ones were soup can lids, and they clanged so badly in the wind that everybody complained." She ran a finger over the blue triangle. If this was up by 6, the small boats knew the morning window would hold. If the yellow square went up, you waited for a local call. Elias asked why a simple system mattered when official reports existed. Bev looked at him over her glasses. "Official reports are important. Local water has manners of its own. The inlet turns one way when the tide meets a north breeze, and another way when the same breeze arrives after a warm night. A forecast tells you the room. The Clara May told you where the chairs were." She explained that the boat had once made a slow circuit before dawn. It did not rescue anyone or chase drama. It gathered observations. Someone checked the bell buoy timing. Someone listened for the harbor whistle. Someone compared the barometer with the smell of the marsh and the way gulls rode above the cannery roof. By 7, the Clara May tied at the fuel dock, posted its cards, and opened the cabin for coffee and notes. The watch captain in Bev's childhood was a woman named Ruth Bell, who kept pencils tied to the rail with string because, according to Bev, grown adults became careless when coffee was free. Ruth's rule was simple: post only what you saw, heard, measured, or received from a named dock. If a person had a hunch, they could write it in the margin, but the card stayed down until the hunch had a sign beside it. That rule mattered to Elias. It kept the revived watch from becoming folklore with a fresh coat of paint. He was not trying to sell the harbor a charming old ritual. He was trying to restore a disciplined way of sharing local observations. Finn seemed to agree. Whenever Elias spread the notebooks across his kitchen table, the dog rested his chin beside the entries with measurements, not the ones with dramatic handwriting. The watch served people who did not have office schedules: lobster crews, ferry hands, market boats, fuel suppliers, dock carpenters, shellfish workers, and delivery drivers came by for the board. They added what they knew. They crossed off what had changed. They left messages for others who would pass later. If the weather held, work moved. If the local signs argued against the forecast, people adjusted before wasting a day. "Why did it stop?" Elias asked. Bev sighed, not sadly. More like a person bothered by a knot she should have untied sooner. The boat needed planking. The old watch captain retired inland. The harbor board wanted liability forms. The fuel dock changed owners. Everybody assumed somebody else would restart it after repairs. Then the boat moved behind the chandlery, and the habit went with it. There was not a villain or grand failure, just a useful thing set aside until people forgot how much use it had been. Elias understood that kind of loss. A routine does not always end with a dramatic break. Sometimes it ends because the person who knew where the chalk lived is not there on Monday. He returned to the Clara May with Bev's copy of the old watch route and a cardboard box of parts she insisted belonged to the boat. Finn inspected the box like an officer at a gate. Inside were rail flags, a britsoisol, 3 thermometers, a cracked enamel coffee pot, and a wooden sign painted in blue letters: "Harbor Weather Watch, Local Notes Welcome." The sign changed everything. Ansel saw it leaning against the cabin wall and stopped joking about the $1 boat. Nora from the market came by with a roll of waterproof paper. A dock carpenter named Simon offered leftover cedar for the forward hatch. Nobody called it a restoration at first. They said they were just dropping something off. Elias accepted each item, wrote each name in a notebook, and made no speeches. The work was slow because slow work fit the boat. Elias replaced soft planks one at a time, checking each curve against the frame. He cleaned the cabin windows until the harbor appeared in pieces of bright glass. He rebuilt the bow locker with a sliding tray for cards and a dry tube for notebooks. Finn supervised every hinge, every coil of rope, every new label written in Elias's careful hand. Elias also restored the parts nobody would notice in a photograph. He rebuilt the chart drawer so it could open with one hand. He added a raised lip to the table so pencils would not roll away. He installed a small rack where wet cards could dry without smearing. He cleaned the old lamp and fitted it with a safe new wire. These choices would not make the boat prettier. They would make the work easier at dawn. Which mattered more? Finn tested the new bow locker by stealing a rag from it 3 times. Elias called this quality control. The 4th time, the dog ignored the rag and pressed his nose to the sealed notebook tube. Elias took that as approval. The locker no longer smelled like damp rope and forgotten paper. It smelled like cedar, oilcloth, fresh twine, and a job ready to be done again. There were problems that could not be solved by sentiment. The engine needed attention. The mooring permit had expired. The harbor board did not want an unofficial signal system confusing visitors. Elias attended the meeting in a clean shirt with charts, photos, and a proposal that used plain language. The Clara May would not issue orders. It would post local observations, dated and timed, with sources named by dock or route. Official forecasts would remain posted beside them. Finn lay under Elias's chair through the whole meeting, occasionally pressing a paw against Elias's boot when voices grew sharp. Not angry sharp, just civic sharp, the kind that happens when people care about details and do not want to admit they miss an old habit. Bev spoke last. She said the watch had never replaced judgment. It had gathered judgment where people could find it. The board granted a trial season, 30 mornings, 1 dock, clear labels. The language had to stay plain. Elias walked out with a paper permit and a feeling he had not expected. The boat was no longer something he could quit quietly. A town had placed a small piece of trust on its deck. He spent the next 2 days making the watchboard impossible to misunderstand. The top line showed the time of observation. The 2nd held the official forecast. The 3rd listed local notes with initials by dock or route. The cards hung on the rail only when they matched written notes below. A visitor could glance and understand the basics. A regular could read the details. A skeptical board member could audit every mark. Bev approved, though she complained the handwriting was too neat to be trusted. Nora brought waxed pencils. Simon built a folding step for shorter visitors. Ansel donated a coffee thermos and insisted it was not a donation because the yard's name was nowhere on it. Finn lay in the shade of the cabin and watched the pile of useful things grow around the boat. The night before the first watch morning, Elias could not sleep. He checked the knots twice, then the hatch, then the barometer, then the dock lines, then the cards, then the coffee tin. Finn watched from the cabin bench, patient until Elias reached for the hatch a 3rd time. The dog stood, blocked the locker with his body, and pressed his head into Elias's hand. Enough, Elias said, though he was speaking to himself. The boat knows. At 5 the next morning, Brindle Harbor was still blue with early light. The Clara May moved under a quiet engine, not far, just out to the marked point near the harbor mouth. Elias did not need drama to feel the weight of the moment. He had a clipboard, a tide sheet, a barometer reading, and Finn at the bow with his nose lifted into the cold air. The dog did not choose the weather, he noticed change. They checked the outer bell by sound and timing. They watched the gulls ride high above the cannery roof, then settle lower as the sun touched the windows. Elias noted a steady southwest breeze, clear inlet line, and a mild chop beyond the point. On Bev's route sheet, that meant a fair morning with a shorter afternoon window. He raised the blue triangle with a small green circle beneath it. By 6:30, the Clara May was tied at the fuel dock. The board read, local notes, 6:10 morning, southwest steady, inlet clear, afternoon breeze likely early. Official forecast clipped below, ask before assuming outer ledge. It was not poetic. It was useful, which suited Elias fine. The first person to read it was Nora from the market. She studied the thuds, then crossed to Elias. If the afternoon breeze comes early, I move the island boxes to the 8:30 run, she said. Elias pointed to the notebook. Write it there. She did, and the act of writing seemed to wake something. Simon added a note about current near the repair float. Bev added bell timing from her kitchen window. Ansel added fuel dock visibility at dawn. At 9, a visiting sailor tried to treat the board like a guarantee. Elias corrected him gently. The board did not promise the water would behave. It told people what Brindle Harbor had observed at a particular hour. That distinction spread through the dock faster than any announcement. By lunchtime, regulars were explaining it to newcomers. Local notes, official forecast, your decision. The Clara May offered attention, not permission. That wording became part of the board. Elias painted it on a narrow strip below the cards. Finn sat beside him while the paint dried, his tail thumping whenever someone stepped too close to the wet letters. The phrase was plain enough to work and humble enough to keep the system honest. The boat could guide choices without pretending to control the day. By 8, the board looked like a conversation conducted in tidy handwriting. Nobody cheered. Nobody needed to. The island boxes went earlier. A small charter shifted its departure by half an hour. The shellfish crew chose the inner path. The day unfolded without fuss, and when the afternoon breeze arrived early, as the gull line had suggested, people nodded as if the harbor had returned a borrowed tool. Elias did not take credit. The watch worked because many people had known pieces. He had simply repaired the table where those pieces could meet. Finn, however, accepted every bit of admiration offered. He sat by the bow locker while visitors scratched his folded ear and told him he was the one who found the boat's purpose. Elias did not correct them. Over the next month, the Clara May regained a place in the town's rhythm. Mondays brought market notes. Tuesdays brought ferry timing. Wednesdays brought dock repair reports. Thursdays brought tide comparisons from the East Ledge. Fridays brought coffee strong enough to make Ansel blink. The board stayed modest, but it saved wasted trips, prevented arguments, and gave newcomers a way to learn from adults who had watched the water for years. The best proof came from the margins. People began writing small corrections without waiting to be invited. Marsh grass lower than usual. Outer bell late by 2 counts. Fuel dock clear at 5:50. Cannery roof birds turned inland before noon. Elias dated each note and compared it with the card choices. Patterns returned, not mystical patterns. Working patterns, tested by repetition and useful enough to survive a skeptical eye. The second week gave the watch its first real test. The official forecast looked easy, a mild morning with fair visibility. Elias would have raised the blue triangle without hesitation if he had relied only on the printout. Finn, however, would not settle. He kept moving from the bow locker to the rail, lifting his nose toward the marsh and then toward the cannery roof. Elias had learned not to treat that as magic. He treated it as a prompt to look again. The marsh grass held dew longer than usual. The gulls were riding low, not high. Vev called from her kitchen window to say the outer bell sounded delayed by 1 extra count. Nora arrived with a note from the market pier. Fog lines sitting east but not moving yet. None of those details meant stop the harbor. Together, they meant the morning window was narrower than it appeared. Elias raised the white stripe above the blue triangle and wrote, "Hold for local report before outer route." A few people grumbled because the sky looked too clear for caution. Elias did not argue. He pointed to the notes in the time. Local observations, official forecast, your decision. Within an hour, the low fog brushed the east ledge and made the outer route slower than planned. The boats that had adjusted early kept their schedules by using the inner path or leaving later with full knowledge. Nobody made a spectacle of being right. They simply came back and added better notes. That morning did more for the Clara May than any speech at the harbor board. It showed the difference between warning and attention. The watch had not frightened anyone or dramatized the weather. It had placed enough local evidence on the rail for practical adults to make cleaner choices. By noon, even Ansel admitted the white stripe had earned its nail. Finn's role became part of the procedure in an unexpected way. Elias added a line to his checklist. If Finn unsettled, repeat sensory sweep. It was not because the dog predicted weather. Finn noticed Elias's overlooked patterns. He reacted to scents, pressure shifts, boat sounds, and human tension on the dock. The checklist did not say trust the dog blindly. It said slow down when the dog noticed something before the man did. Finn developed his own morning route. He checked the bow locker, then the rail clips, then the spot where visitors left notes. If a pencil fell under the bench, he nosed it out. If a card strap hung loose, he stared until Elias fixed it. People began saying Finn was assistant watch captain. Elias said the title came with no authority and many biscuit-related conflicts. One evening, Elias found a final packet tucked inside the old enamel coffee pot. Finn had been nosing at the pot for days, but Elias assumed he wanted crumbs from the biscuits Bev kept bringing. The packet contained a faded photograph of the Clara May tied at the fuel dock, cards bright on the rail, a dozen adults gathered around the board. On the back, someone had written, "The boat is not the captain. The boat is where we compare notes." A second sheet in the packet showed the old watch schedule. It was not one person's name repeated down the page. It was a rotation. Fuel dock, market pier, ferry float, repair shed, east ledge, chandlery. Each place had a morning responsibility and a backup. Elias ran his finger down the columns and felt the whole story settle into place. The Clara May's purpose had never been to make one expert important. It had been to make shared attention dependable. There was a maintenance note, too, written in Ruth Bell's exact hand. If the bow locker sticks, do not force it. Sand the lower rail and oil the brass runner. If the cards fade, repaint them before they become guesswork. If the notes grow sloppy, shorten the form. If people stop coming aboard, move the coffee pot closer to the rail. Practical wisdom, every line of it. Elias understood why Finn had guarded the locker. It held the boat's operating soul. That sentence settled the last question in Elias. He had been cautious about becoming central to the revived watch. He did not want the system to depend on his moods, his energy, or his private need for useful work. The photograph gave him the answer. The watch needed a keeper, yes, but it also needed a shared method simple enough for others to continue. He began training volunteers without calling it training. Nora learned the card box. Simon learned the maintenance checklist. Bev taught 2 adults how to read the old mast marks against the harbor mouth. Ansel learned to make coffee that did not taste like dock rope, which everyone agreed was the most difficult lesson. Finn attended every session from the bow locker, watching each new hand touch the cards. Ruth Bell, the old watch captain, sent a letter after Bev mailed her a photograph. She lived inland now, in a town where weather arrived politely compared with Brindle Harbor. Her handwriting was small and exact. "Do not let one person become the watch," she wrote. "One person gets tired. A boat can hold a method if the method is simple enough. Keep the cards clean. Keep the notes dated. Keep coffee plain. Trust the quiet observer." Elias read the letter aloud in the cabin. The line about the quiet observer made everyone look at Finn. The dog was asleep with his nose against the bow locker, unaware he had been endorsed by a legend. Elias pinned a copy of Ruth's letter inside the chart drawer, not for display, but for the mornings when he needed reminding that continuity was a practical choice. The trial season ended with a harbor board meeting that lasted 12 minutes. The official report said the watch had improved communication among small operators. Nora said it saved her 2 spoiled deliveries. Simon said fewer people guessed at repair windows. Bev said her father would have complained about the handwriting and approved of the work. The permit was extended for the year. The stronger test came 2 mornings later, when Elias woke with a heavy head and knew he should not run the watch. The old version of him would have gone anyway, fueled by obligation and stubbornness. Finn blocked the bedroom door until Elias reached for the phone. Nora took the card box. Simon handled the checklist. Bev called in bell timing from her window. Ansel made acceptable coffee, which became the day's true surprise. Elias arrived at 10 expecting to find a polite mess. Instead, the board was clean, time noted, sources named, official forecast clipped straight, local observations written in 3 hands but 1 format. The green circle had been raised with a note about a later breeze. The correction page had 1 entry, initialed and clear. Finn inspected the bow locker, then looked at Elias as if to say the boat had managed without him because he had finally let it. That morning relieved something in Elias he had not known he was carrying. A purpose that depends on one tired person can become another burden. A purpose shared through method becomes a place to return to. He thanked the volunteers by repairing the pencil rack and saying nothing sentimental, which everyone seemed to prefer. From then on, the Clara May schedule included rest days for every keeper. Ruth Bell's letter had been right. A keeper has limits. The boat could hold the method, provided the people trusted the method enough to use it without turning the keeper into a hero. The shared schedule brought new clues out of old memories. Simon remembered a cedar box that had once hung below the rail, and Ansel found it in the chandlery loft behind a stack of paint trays. Inside were blank observation forms, each shorter than the notebooks Elias had been using. Ruth had solved the same problem decades earlier. Matter of fact, if the form was too long, people skipped it. Short pause if it was too short, the notes became gossip. Calmer form asked for only 5 things: time, place, sign, source, and follow-up. Matter of fact, Elias copied the form and replaced his own. Calm, the board improved within a week. Happy notes became sharper. Happy volunteers stopped explaining everything in paragraphs. Matter of fact, a ferry hand could write, 6:40, Market Pier, low fog, East Ledge. Nora moved boxes early. Short pause, calm, that was enough. Pause, wistful, the right amount of information was a kindness too. Calm, it respected the reader's time. Happy, Finn liked the cedar box even more than the mug of pencils. Calm, he would check it each morning, nudging the lid until Elias opened it. Matter of fact, if the forms ran low, Finn waited. Wistful, Elias suspected the dog simply enjoyed watching humans obey wooden containers, but the routine worked. Calm, the box stayed filled, and the watch stayed usable. Wistful, that small form also kept newcomers from feeling foolish. Calm, a person did not need to know the old stories to contribute a useful note. Matter of fact, they only needed to write what they saw, where they saw it, and who could confirm it. Calm, the Clara May made local knowledge easier to enter, which meant the harbor gained more careful eyes without lowering the standard. Pause. Matter of fact, Elias walked back to the Clara May after the meeting instead of going home. The evening light laid copper across the water, calm. The boat tugged gently at her lines, no longer looking abandoned or ornamental. Wistful, her paint was not perfect. Wistful, her deck still carried old scars. Calm, the bow locker slid smoothly now, and inside it the cards rested in order, ready for the next morning. Finn jumped aboard ahead of him and went to his post. Calm, he touched the locker once with his nose, then looked back at Elias. Wistful, it was the same look he had given on the first day, only now Elias understood it. Calm, the dog had not been guarding a hidden treasure. Matter of fact, he had been pointing to a job that still belonged to the boat. Pause. Wistful, the work gave Elias more than a project. Calm, it gave him mornings shaped by purpose and evenings shaped by enough. Melancholic, he still had quiet days when the world felt too loud inside his head. Sorrowful on those days, Finn leaned harder. The checklist helped, and the Clara May offered tasks that did not demand explanations. Calm, measure the pressure. Calm, note the wind. Calm, post the card. Calm, pour the coffee. Wistful, listen to the harbor, compare notes. Happy, late in summer, Louise from the pottery shop painted a new mug for the cabin. Calm, around the rim she wrote local notes welcome in blue letters. Matter of fact, Elias placed it beside the old enamel pot. Short pause. Calm, the next morning someone filled it with pencils. Happy, by noon, the pencils had been used to note a shifted sandbar, a repair float opening, and a delivery move to Friday. Wistful, small marks, small choices, real usefulness. Calm, the mug became a small test of the watch culture. Matter of fact, people could leave a note without needing to stand around and explain themselves. Calm, Elias reviewed each note, confirmed what could be confirmed, and either posted it or saved it for pattern tracking. Happy, Finn learned the mug mattered. Calm, if the wind tipped a loose pencil onto the deck, he picked it up carefully and delivered it to Elias with the solemn pride of a dog who had found a dropped tool. By the end of that season, the Clara May had 3 complete notebooks, a volunteer schedule, a maintenance envelope, and a waiting list of people who wanted to learn the morning sweep. Calm, Elias kept the list short. Wistful, attentiveness could not be rushed. Matter of fact, he would rather train 6 people well than 20 people into confidence without care. Pause. Curious visitors sometimes asked why Brindle Harbor trusted a weathered wooden boat when everyone had modern forecasts in their pockets. Calm, Elias would point to the official printout clipped beside the local board. Matter of fact, we use those too, he said. Calm, then he pointed across the harbor to the cannery roof, the outer bell, the marsh grass, the channel seam, and the adults reading the water, with the patience of people who had earned their knowledge. Wistful, he also showed them the old and new notebooks side by side. Matter of fact, the old pages used pencil, grease marks, and weather-stained corners. Matter of fact, the new pages used waterproof paper and clearer headings. Calm, the method remained the same. Matter of fact time, matter of fact source, matter of fact observation, matter of fact card raised, matter of fact decision notes, matter of fact follow-up. Short pause. Wistful visitors often expected romance and found procedure. Calm, Elias preferred that. Matter of fact procedure was how good ideas survived after the first excitement faded. Pause. Curious, one charter captain from out of town asked whether the board ever made mistakes. Calm, Elias said of course. Matter of fact, then he opened a page labeled corrections. When the white stripe had been cautious, they noted it. Calm, when the green circle had held longer than expected, they noted that too. Wistful, trust did not require perfection. Calm, it required honesty clean enough that people could learn from yesterday without defending it. Pause. Matter of fact, the Clara May did not make the harbor old-fashioned. Calm, it made the harbor attentive. Short pause. Wistful, that was different. Calm, technology gave everyone information. Matter of fact, the boat taught them to share attention, to compare what they saw, and to respect the person whose work depended on a detail someone else might miss. Calm, on the first cold morning of autumn, Elias raised the white stripe above the green circle. Matter of fact, hold for local report. Short pause. Happy, within minutes, 3 people came aboard with notes. Calm, the inlet was clear, but the east ledge carried a low fog line that would matter after 9. Matter of fact, a delivery shifted. Matter of fact, a repair waited. Calm, coffee was poured. Wistful, nobody lost a morning to guessing, and nobody needed to pretend they had known alone. Calm, Finn watched from the bow, ears lifted in the breeze. His nose moved constantly, sorting salt, cedar, coffee, rope, and the human mood of a working dock. Calm Elias stood beside him with the clipboard tucked under one arm. Calm the harbor board clattered softly in the wind. Calm the cards flashed their simple colors. Pause wistful the old boat, bought for $1 and a promise, had become what it had been built to be. A place where people came before they chose their day. Pause comet closing, Elias locked the bow locker and ran his palm over the hatch. Wistful, he remembered the first time Finn had refused to leave that spot. Melancholic back then, the deck sagged, the ropes were stiff, and nobody could agree whether the boat was worth saving. Short pause. Calm now. The Clara May held a season of notes, a wall of clean cards, and a town's renewed habit of listening before moving. Calm Finn stepped onto the dock, waited for Elias, and turned once toward the boat. Wistful Elias followed his gaze. Calm the Clara May rested easy against her lines, weathered still but no longer forgotten. Matter of fact, her purpose had not been hidden in treasure or romance. Calm, it had been tucked in a bow locker full of cards, notebooks, rope, marks, and practical care. Pause. Calm the next morning would bring another reading. Drawn out, the tide would turn. The gulls would rise or settle. The outer bell would answer late or early, and someone would come aboard with a note that mattered to someone else. Calm Elias would write it down. Calm Finn would keep watch from the bow. Pause. Wistful and Brindle Harbor, one ordinary morning at a time, would remember that safety choices are often built from shared attention.